Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have just made history, breaking free from ECOWAS and sending shockwaves through West Africa. This isn't just about politics, this is about sovereignty, survival, and the beginning of a new era, while ECOWAS scrambles to contain the damage. These nations are forging their own path, shaking off the last remnants of colonial control. Chapter 1. The truth about ECOWAS' economic trap. For decades, ECOWAS presented itself as a force for economic growth and regional unity. It claimed to promote free trade, development, and political stability. But let's ask the real question: who benefited the most? Was it Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger? Or were it the wealthier nations that dictated the bloc's policies? The truth is that these three countries were never meant to thrive under ECOWAS. They were used. Their role was to provide cheap raw materials, gold, uranium, and agricultural products, while ECOWAS' biggest players, like Nigeria, Ghana, and Ivory Coast, built strong industrial markets. The system kept them dependent, forcing them to export resources at low prices and import expensive finished goods. Take Niger, for example. This country supplies a significant portion of the world's uranium, which powers European nuclear plants. Yet, Niger itself remains energy-starved, with much of its population lacking access to stable electricity. Burkina Faso and Mali are major gold producers, contributing billions of dollars in exports. Yet their economies remain fragile because they were locked into ECOWAS' exploitative trade structures. Now, by leaving ECOWAS, these nations are breaking free from that cycle. They're no longer bound by trade agreements that benefit the wealthy at their expense. Instead, they're negotiating new deals on their own terms, with Algeria, Chad, Russia, and China stepping in as alternative partners. ECOWAS has always been quick to punish its own people while turning a blind eye to corruption, insurgency, and economic mismanagement. It never imposed sanctions on leaders who exploited their nations, yet it wasted no time in trying to discipline countries that dared to leave. Chapter 2. ECOWAS' weak response. Despite its tough talk in the past, ECOWAS' response to this exit has been surprisingly weak. The organization announced that it will continue recognizing passports, allowing visa-free movement, and treating goods from these three nations under the ECOWAS trade liberalization scheme. Sounds generous, right? But this isn't about goodwill, it's a strategic pause, an attempt to keep the door open while ECOWAS figures out what to do next. They know that if they impose harsh restrictions now, it could backfire, pushing these countries further into the arms of new allies. Worse, it could inspire other nations to consider leaving. Let's not forget how we got here. When military coups took place in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, ECOWAS reacted with immediate suspensions, sanctions, and threats of military intervention. They tried to strong-arm these countries into submission, demanding a return to civilian rule on ECOWAS terms. But instead of backing down, these nations doubled down, choosing independence over compliance. That's why ECOWAS is now hesitant. If they retaliate too aggressively, they risk accelerating their own decline. And that's exactly what's happening. Chapter 3. The death of ECOWAS' monopoly. ECOWAS once controlled trade across West Africa, but with this departure, its influence over the Sahel is crumbling. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger form the heart of the Sahel, a vast region connecting West Africa to North Africa. Their exit means ECOWAS has effectively lost control over critical trade corridors and transit routes. This loss has massive implications. Algeria, Chad, and Libya now have greater influence over trade in the region. Goods that once flowed through ECOWAS markets will now take different routes, creating new trade networks that bypass the bloc entirely. The economic balance is shifting, and ECOWAS is losing its grip. Security is another major concern. For years, ECOWAS positioned itself as the leading force in counterinsurgency operations in the Sahel, but without Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, three nations that have been on the front lines of the fight against insurgent groups, ECOWAS' security strategy is in disarray. The intelligence, coordination, and military positioning they once relied on are now outside their control. And here's where ECOWAS made its biggest mistake. They underestimated these nations' ability to adapt. Chapter 4. The Rise of the Alliance of Sahel States. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are not just stepping away from ECOWAS, they are charting a bold new path. Together, they are forming the Alliance of Sahel States, a regional bloc born out of necessity and a shared vision for a more independent future. The formation of AES is a direct response to the shortcomings of ECOWAS, a clear statement that these nations are no longer willing to operate under systems that serve foreign interests over their own. The Alliance of Sahel States is built on three core pillars: economic cooperation, military coordination, and political independence. By banding together, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are redefining what it means to be sovereign in a region long influenced by external forces. No longer will they adhere to trade policies dictated by ECOWAS that often benefit the larger economies at their expense. Instead, they are crafting new trade agreements tailored to their specific needs, engaging directly with countries like Algeria, Chad, Russia, and China. On the security front, the alliance is taking control of its destiny. Unlike ECOWAS, which often aligns its security policies with Western agendas, AES members are building a defense strategy rooted in local realities. They are coordinating their military efforts, sharing intelligence, and positioning their forces in a way that protects their borders and citizens, not foreign interests. Financial independence is another critical focus. For too long, the economic framework of these nations was tethered to the CFA franc, a currency with deep colonial roots controlled by France through ECOWAS institutions. By exploring new financial systems and potentially moving away from the CFA francs, the alliance is working to break these chains, giving its members control over their economic futures. This new alliance poses a significant threat to ECOWAS dominance. The existence of AES shows that there is another way, a way that prioritizes African interests and local governance. If AES thrives, it could inspire other nations to reconsider their relationship with ECOWAS, potentially leading to a broader reshaping of West Africa's political and economic landscape. ECOWAS is acutely aware of this threat. The success of the Alliance of Sahel States would undermine ECOWAS's credibility, revealing its limitations and exposing its dependency on external powers. The formation of AES has sparked fear within ECOWAS because it offers a model for self-governance and economic autonomy, one that could very well become the blueprint for other nations looking to reclaim their sovereignty. Chapter 5. Who's next? The biggest question now isn't just about Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, it's about the domino effect. Who will be the next country to leave ECOWAS? Because this isn't just about three nations making a bold move. It's about the slow and very real decline of ECOWAS as a dominant force in Africa. Guinea is the most obvious candidate. For years, it has been openly critical of ECOWAS, questioning its legitimacy and pushing back against its interference. The military-led government in Guinea has shown little interest in aligning with ECOWAS's policies, especially after the bloc imposed sanctions on them following their 2021 coup. With the formation of the AES, Guinea now has a clear example of what an alternative to ECOWAS could look like. If AES proves successful, Guinea could very well be the next to walk away. Then there's Chad. This country has always had a complicated relationship with West Africa, balancing its connections between Central and West African nations. Chad is not a full member of ECOWAS, but it has maintained ties with the bloc. Now, with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger cutting off ties, Chad has every reason to reconsider where its true alliances should lie. If AES offers better security cooperation and economic opportunities, Chad could shift further away from ECOWAS and deepen its ties with the Sahel Alliance. Even Mauritania, which previously left ECOWAS in 2000, might feel vindicated by this recent turn of events. At the time, Mauritania's exit was seen as risky, but with ECOWAS now losing key members, Their decision looks more strategic than ever. The fact that other nations are now following a similar path could reinforce Mauritania's stance and possibly push them towards strengthening ties with AES instead. But let's not forget the bigger players in the background, Russia and China. These global powers have already started strengthening their relationships with Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Russia has increased military cooperation, offering training, weapons, and security agreements, while China has expanded economic partnerships through infrastructure projects and direct investments. If these nations receive enough support from Russia and China through trade agreements, military assistance, or financial backing, it could make ECOWAS look even less appealing. Other African nations struggling with ECOWAS policies might start seeing AES, Russia, and China as better alternatives to the Western-backed economic bloc. At this point, ECOWAS is no longer just fighting to keep three nations in its fold. It's fighting for survival. The loss of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger is not just a temporary setback. It's a signal to the rest of Africa that ECOWAS is no longer untouchable. And if ECOWAS doesn't find a way to regain control of the situation, the question won't be if more nations will leave, it'll be when. Chapter 6. Economic Retaliation. There's one thing ECOWAS hasn't fully thought through: retaliation. Because this isn't just a simple breakup, it's a complete shift in power. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger aren't just walking away. They hold resources that ECOWAS and its allies desperately need. If pushed too far, these nations have the ability to strike back in ways that could shake not just the West African economy, but global markets. Let's start with Niger. This country is one of the world's key suppliers of uranium, the very material that keeps European nuclear plants running. France, in particular, has relied on Niger for decades to fuel its energy grid. If Niger decides to cut off uranium exports, European nations, including France, will be left scrambling to secure alternative sources, likely at much higher prices. It would be an economic nightmare, one that could send energy costs soaring across Europe. Then there's Burkina Faso and Mali. These two countries are major producers of gold, a resource that plays a crucial role in global financial markets. Gold isn't just a luxury metal, it's a critical asset for national reserves and economic stability. If Burkina Faso and Mali restrict their gold exports or redirect them to markets outside of ECOWAS control, it could cause price spikes and supply chain disruptions, affecting everything from investment markets to national economies. And this isn't even touching on agriculture and trade routes. These three nations form a key transit corridor for West African goods, connecting the region to North Africa. With their departure, ECOWAS loses its monopoly over Sahelian trade routes, weakening its control over the movement of goods. Now, countries like Algeria, Chad, and Libya gain more influence in regional commerce, while ECOWAS struggles to maintain its economic hold. ECOWAS might have thought it could pressure these nations into crawling back, but it severely underestimated their leverage. If ECOWAS tries to impose economic sanctions, these nations have the power to hit back hard. The West African bloc can't afford to push too far because the reality is simple: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger don't need ECOWAS as much as ECOWAS needs them. Chapter 7. The End of an Era. ECOWAS is standing at a crossroads, and there's no going back. It can either adapt to this new reality or watch itself crumble under the weight of its own arrogance. For decades, ECOWAS positioned itself as the ultimate authority in West African politics and economics, dictating trade rules, security strategies, and financial policies. But now, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have shattered that illusion. These three nations have proven something ECOWAS never wanted anyone to realize: independence is possible. They were told they couldn't survive without the bloc. Yet here they are, forming their own alliance, securing new trade partners, and building a future outside ECOWAS control. And that might just be the most dangerous idea of all. Because if they succeed, what's stopping Guinea, Chad, or even Mauritania from following the same path? The days of unquestioned ECOWAS dominance are over. The balance of power is shifting, and the longer ECOWAS clings to the past, the faster its own decline will accelerate. Now, it's time to hear from you. Will more nations leave ECOWAS? Can the alliance of Sahel states succeed? Let's talk in the comments. And if you want more content on African history, politics, and the untold stories that shape our world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications.